The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in glass. Elena Martinez arrived at St. Michael's Pediatric ICU at 6:30 in the morning, 20 minutes early as always, her scrubs crisp white, her badge already clipped to her collar. The parking lot had been empty except for the night shift cars and a maintenance truck idling near the loading dock, its diesel exhaust cutting through the humid Atlanta air. She moved through the hospital corridors the way she moved through most of her life, efficiently, without drawing attention, a ghost in rubber-soled shoes. 6 years. That's how long she had been walking these halls, healing the broken and holding the dying, and not once had anyone asked her real name. Elena Martinez was the name on her driver's license, her paycheck, her hospital ID. It was not the name her mother had given her at birth. That name lived in a classified file somewhere in the Pentagon, redacted and archived, attached to a service record that officially no longer existed. The official designation was simple: erased. After the operation in Marja, after the extraction that shouldn't have happened and the people she'd carried out who weren't supposed to survive, she'd been ordered to disappear into civilian life. New identity. New city. New everything. The only thing she'd kept was the tarnished challenge coin in her pocket, dented on one side where a 7.62mm round had stopped short of her heart in 2003. The ICU was already alive with the sounds of morning shift preparations. Monitors beeped their steady rhythm. A ventilator wheezed its mechanical breath over a toddler in Bay 3. Nurses moved between patients with the choreographed precision of people who had done this 10,000 times before. Elena walked to the locker room, changed into her scrubs, and clipped her credentials to her collar. She didn't speak to anyone. The other nurses had long ago stopped trying to include her in their conversations. She was efficient, reliable, present but not present. They barely saw her. By 7:15, she was in the pediatric ICU proper, reviewing charts and checking oxygen levels on a 6-year-old with aspiration pneumonia. The boy's chest rose and fell with the help of the ventilator. Oxygen saturation 93%. Not terrible. Not good. His name was Marcus, no relation to the corporal she'd met once, years ago, in another life. She adjusted the flow rate slightly, watching the monitor climb to 96, and made a note in the chart with the precision of someone who understood that handwriting could save or kill. That was when Dr. Benjamin Caldwell arrived. She heard him before she saw him. His Italian shoes clicking against the linoleum with a rhythm that suggested he owned the space, owned the people in it, owned the very air they breathed. He was 7 feet tall, or close enough, with the kind of jawline that looked carved from marble and a presence that made the air pressure change when he entered a room. His white coat was pressed to military specifications despite having no military background. His Yale ring caught the fluorescent light. Behind him came 2 residents, junior doctors who moved in his orbit like satellites around the sun. Elena continued adjusting the ventilator settings. She didn't look up. "You?" Caldwell's voice came from somewhere above her. Like a tank idling in a garage, all power and threat delivered in a conversational tone. "The nurse who was correcting my dosage calculation yesterday." Elena straightened. Still didn't look at him. She was holding a breath she didn't know she'd taken. "The patient in Bay 2. Septic presentation. You flagged a gram of vancomycin as excessive for an 8-year-old. His shoes moved closer to her. She could smell cologne and coffee. "You have your RN, I assume?" "Yes, doctor." "From where?" "Grady Memorial. 2018. He laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "I'm Benjamin Caldwell, Chief of Pediatrics as of this morning. Yale Medical School. Johns Hopkins Fellowship. Published in JAMA twice." He turned to address the nursing station, his voice rising so that everyone in the ICU could hear. "I will be making changes to how this department operates. I expect precision. I expect protocol adherence. I do not expect corrections from nursing staff." He paused. Then, with the kind of smile that suggested he was about to deliver a joke, he said, "Actually, you know what? I'm going to make a prediction. That nurse right there." He pointed at Elena. 1 week. I give her 1 week before she quits. In fact, I'll bet a month's salary on it. $3,500 says she can't handle the pressure of working under a real chief. The nursing station went quiet. Elena felt the weight of 6 pairs of eyes on her. She felt Caldwell waiting for a reaction, anger, tears, defensiveness, anything he could use. She gave him nothing. Her jaw tightened so imperceptibly that only someone trained to read the human body under extreme stress would have noticed it. She touched the challenge coin in her pocket 3 times, a nervous habit no one saw. Her hands remained perfectly steady. "Thank you for the welcome, Doctor," she said quietly. "I'll return to my rounds." She walked past him toward the next patient bay. Not rushed. Not slow. The way someone walks who understands that any deviation from normal would be ammunition. Caldwell watched her go. He didn't smile anymore. At lunch, Elena sat alone in the cafeteria at a corner table, her food arranged with military precision, protein, vegetables, carbohydrates in separate sections. She was 3 bites into a grilled chicken breast when Caldwell approached carrying his own tray. He was with 2 male residents, both laughing at something he'd just said. The laughter stopped when he reached her table. "You know," Caldwell said, setting his tray down on the edge of hers, "I realized I never got your name." "The nurse who corrects doctors." Elena looked up at him. "Elena. Elena." He said it like it was the name of someone he felt sorry for. "Just Elena. Just Elena." "Well, just Elena, I believe in establishing proper hierarchy from day one." He leaned closer. She could smell the mint on his breath. And then his elbow moved, a casual gesture, almost accidental, and her tray was on the floor. Coffee spreading across the linoleum like a stain. Chicken breast sliding under a table 2 feet away. The sound of ceramic breaking. The cafeteria didn't go completely silent, but it got quieter. People noticed. Caldwell leaned down, his face very close to hers, and said, "Pick that up, sweetheart." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not anger. Anger would have been simpler. It was something colder than anger, something that lived beneath the skin where people couldn't see it. She picked up her napkin. She walked to the trash. She collected the scattered pieces of her lunch with her hands while Caldwell stood with his arms crossed, watching her like he'd just taught a dog a lesson. "Good," he said when she finished. "I like nurses who understand their place." She didn't respond. She walked to the sink and washed her hands. The water was hot. She thought about the challenge coin in her pocket, about the weight of it, about what it meant. About what she'd been before the civilian clothes and the new name. About the men and women who hadn't made it out of Marja. About the promises she'd made to forget. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Elena was in the supply closet, ostensibly retrieving dressings for the patient in Bay 1. The door was closed. The light was dim. She gripped the challenge coin in her pocket so hard her knuckles went white. The coin was dented on one side. Tarnished from 21 years of being carried in a combat uniform, a rucksack, a military shirt with no name on it. It bore the insignia of a unit that didn't officially acknowledge her, a name that existed only in redacted files and the memories of people who'd sworn an oath never to speak it. She pressed the coin against her palm so hard it left an imprint. Pain was information. Pain was data. The trembling in her hand wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was the weight of everything she'd agreed to bury when she took the new identity and walked into a hospital and became invisible. She held the coin for 43 seconds. Then she released it, straightened her scrubs, and returned to her rounds without a word. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Caldwell wasn't finished. Not even close. The worst part was that Caldwell wasn't finished. Not even close. Wednesday morning round started like every other day at St. Michael's, the fluorescent lights humming their electronic dirge, the ventilators wheezing their mechanical rhythm, the smell of antiseptic and coffee mixing into something that felt like hospital air itself. Elena moved through the pediatric ICU with the kind of efficiency that made her nearly invisible, updating charts, checking fours, her voice soft and measured as she consulted with the day shift residents. A 7-year-old with pneumonia occupied Bay 4. Septic shock risk. Caldwell had ordered ceftriaxone 500 mg every 12 hours. Elena ran the calculation twice. Once with the patient's actual weight, 52 pounds. Once with the assumption he'd made. Adult dosing. He'd calculated for adult weight. She didn't hesitate. She walked directly to Caldwell at the central station where he stood reviewing charts with 3 residents circled around him like attendants to a king. Her voice was quiet, exactly the right register for a professional consultation. The ceftriaxone order, doctor. It's calculated at 18 mg per kilogram. The patient weighs 52 pounds. She paused, letting the math hang in the air. That's 23.6 kilograms. The dose should be 425 milligrams, not 500. Caldwell's pen stopped mid-note. He turned slowly, and the smile that spread across his face was the smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The residents shifted. One of them actually took a step back. "I'll bet a month's salary our little wallflower here quits within the week," Caldwell announced, his voice pitched loud enough for the entire nursing station to hear. She clearly doesn't understand how hierarchy works in a real hospital. Or maybe she thinks she's smarter than her chief of pediatrics. Nervous laughter rippled through the group like a contagion. Elena watched his eyes. They weren't angry, they were satisfied. He was testing something. Measuring her breaking point like a lab technician calibrating equipment. "The dosage is correct, Ms. Martinez. I've been doing pediatric calculations for 18 years. I suggest you stick to what you're qualified for." Elena's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The muscle worked once, twice, then stopped. She nodded with the kind of deference that suggested agreement, though her eyes remained flat as slate. "Of course, doctor. I'll update the chart." She turned and walked back to Bay 4, her movements precise and unhurried. She did update the chart, with the correct dosage. She changed the order herself, documentation clean and proper, routed through the pharmacy system where it would sit until someone noticed the discrepancy. Or until the original dose harmed the child. Caldwell would notice first. He'd have to. And when he did, he'd look like the one who wasn't paying attention. She'd given him something worse than confrontation. She'd given him a ticking clock. But that wasn't the worst part. The cafeteria at lunch was crowded, that particular chaos of the midday shift where everyone tried to eat in 45 minutes or less. Elena's tray held a turkey sandwich, a cup of soup, a bottle of water, nothing that would stain, nothing elaborate. She was walking past the doctor's table, just passing through, when Caldwell shifted his chair backward without looking. The movement was casual. Deliberate. His heel caught the corner of her tray and the whole thing tumbled. Soup splashed across the tile floor in a spreading bloom of red. The sandwich landed face down. Plates shattered with a sound like small bones breaking. 50 people turned to look. The cafeteria's ambient noise didn't stop, the music still played, the cash registers still chimed, but somehow the sound had changed, compressed, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. Caldwell leaned down, his voice projecting across the sudden quiet. "Pick that up, sweetheart. That's what you're good at, right? Cleaning up messes." He wasn't whispering. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the moment to establish itself as public record. Elena knelt on the tile, her movements deliberate and controlled. Her hands collected the broken ceramic pieces, each fragment accounted for, arranged with almost ritual precision into a neat stack. The sandwich went into her palm. The soup was mopped with napkins, 3 of them, working in methodical passes until the floor was dry. A custodian appeared with a mop anyway, but Elena waved him back, finished the job herself, carried the debris to the trash without looking at Caldwell, without acknowledging the gazes pressing down on her from every direction. She stood, turned, and walked out of the cafeteria. What nobody saw was the trembling that started in her hands once she was in the hallway. Not visible shaking. Not the kind that made you collapse or cry or run to a bathroom. Just the subtle tremor of someone whose central nervous system had registered a threat and was releasing adrenaline in measured, controlled doses. The kind of trembling that trained people learn to metabolize. She kept walking. The third attack came that afternoon. Elena submitted the chart correction through proper channels, documentation immaculate, following every protocol. She didn't expect Caldwell to accept it quietly. What she didn't expect was the intercept. She was walking past the nurse's station toward the medication room when Caldwell stepped out from the supply hallway, chart in his hands. He saw her. His expression shifted into something predatory. He tore the paperwork in half, deliberately, slowly, one long rip down the center, and held the pieces over her head. Then he dropped them. They scattered across the hallway floor like snow. 3 residents froze. One of them actually looked away, embarrassed for her, which was somehow worse than if they'd laughed. "Pick that up, sweetheart." Caldwell's voice was loud, every syllable measured and clear. "Maybe if you spent less time questioning your betters and more time following orders, you'd understand your place in this hospital." Elena crouched. Her movements were mechanical, efficient, the kind of motion that required no thought. She collected every scattered page, 16 of them now, each piece accounted for. The residents shifted their weight, uncomfortable in the way of people witnessing something they knew was wrong but lacked the institutional power to stop. One of them muttered something to another. Caldwell walked back toward his office without waiting to see her finish. Elena gathered the fragments, walked to the documentation room, and reassembled the pages with tape. Her hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. She filed the corrected chart properly, made notes in the system indicating the sequence of events, and returned to her rounds with her face completely neutral. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a quiet nurse handling an awkward situation with professionalism. What they didn't see was the 90 seconds that came next. The supply closet was small, barely wider than a body, lined with shelves of sterile gauze and saline bags and boxes of 14-gauge angiocath needles. Elena locked the door behind her and gripped the challenge coin in her scrub pocket. The metal was cold, worn smooth by years of hands that no longer existed in any official record. Marja. 2004, a village with a name she couldn't say anymore, a unit designation she'd sworn never to repeat. The coin bore a dent on one side, the place where a bullet had struck it instead of her ribs. 2 centimeters to the left and the bullet would have gone through her lung. Instead it had dented the coin and stopped. She breathed the way she'd been trained. Counted the way she'd been taught. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. The trembling ran through her shoulders and arms, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. Restraint. The physical manifestation of a person holding back something much larger than herself. When she opened the supply closet door, her face was blank. A nurse returning to her duties. Nothing more. Nothing that would tip the scales toward what she could do if she stopped choosing not to. Caldwell had established a pattern now. The public humiliation was working exactly as he intended. Or so he thought. What he didn't understand was that Elena was no longer simply enduring his tests. She was mapping them. Cataloging the escalation. Reading the strategy beneath the aggression the way she'd been trained to read operational patterns in hostile territory. He was building toward something. The question wasn't whether she would break. The question was what would come when someone finally forced him to understand that she had never been what he thought she was. And she had no idea what was about to walk through those doors. Tuesday afternoon at 2:02 p.m., the pediatric ward security doors exploded inward like someone had breached them with a battering ram. Travis Hollins came through the frame at 7 feet tall, 270 pounds of chemical-fueled rage, his pupils dilated to black saucers, sweat streaming down a neck corded with muscle. PCP does that to men, strips away the governor, leaves only the raw animal underneath. He moved like a man whose nervous system had been rewired for violence, each motion too fast, too explosive, a predator made of electricity and bad decisions. The medication cart nearest to him became debris. For bags scattered like confetti. Glass bottles shattered against the tile floor with sounds like breaking bones. A resident froze. A nursing assistant backed toward the supply room. The fluorescent lights above hummed their mechanical rhythm, indifferent, as Travis locked onto the nearest target, a 12-year-old boy in a visitor's pass, standing at the window of room 447. Marcus Webb. Elena's breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. The scar on his left temple. The way his shoulders set when he was afraid. 20 years collapsed into a single moment. Marja Province, Helmand Valley, 2004. A child dying from shrapnel wounds, bleeding out in the dust while her unit took fire from 3 directions. She'd carried him 3 miles through enemy territory, his small body wrapped in her jacket, his blood soaking through her gear, his heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird against her ribs. He should have died. By every military triage protocol, by blood loss mathematics, by the geometry of those wounds, he should have been a body she left behind. Instead, she'd kept him alive through 2 miles of running fire, through 1 more mile of crawling, until the extraction point. Then she'd been erased. Classified operation, no record, officially removed from all rosters. Her identity died in that valley. And now he was here. Now he was a young Marine corporal visiting his baby brother in the ICU. Now he was about to die for the second time. Travis's grip closed around Marcus's throat like a vice. The boy's eyes went wide. His hands came up instinctively, but he was 12 at a 6-foot reach against 7 feet of chemical insanity, and the math was brutally simple. Elena was moving before conscious thought reached her limbs. Her hands were visible, empty, palms forward, the universal language of non-aggression, the opening move of tactical negotiation. Her voice dropped an octave, maybe 2. Not loud. The opposite of loud. A voice like a tank idling in a garage, all idle power, no gear yet, but the promise of what happens when you press the accelerator. You're surrounded, brother. No exits. Travis's head snapped toward her. His pupils tracked, but nothing behind them registered. Pure chemical override. Heart rates through the roof, Elena continued, her cadence steady as a metronome. Can feel it? Chest tight? That's the drug, not the fear. Put him down and we get you help. Right now. No one's hurting you. She was reading him the way she'd read 1,000 men in 1,000 crisis moments, the tremor in his grip, the micro-expressions bleeding through the PCP haze, the way his breathing had gone shallow and rapid. Tachycardia. Hypothermia building. The drug was eating his nervous system from the inside out. Dr. Caldwell's office door had slammed shut somewhere down the corridor. Elena didn't spare a thought for him. Cowardice was information. In this moment, he was irrelevant. Marcus didn't struggle. The boy had military genetics running through his veins, even if he didn't know it yet, even if he had no memory of the woman who'd saved him. His compliance saved his life. Panic would have triggered Holland's response. The drug didn't think, it only reacted to perceived threat. I'm Elena, she said, moving forward at a glacial pace. 1 foot. 2 feet. The distance between them shrinking with each sentence. What's your name, brother? Don't come closer. His voice was gravel and sandpaper, vocal cords shredded from screaming. Probably. The tweaker's rattle, amphetamine psychosis, maybe methamphetamine, maybe both, the PCP sending everything into overdrive. I'm not coming closer, Elena said. She stopped. Feet shoulder-width apart. Center of gravity low. Ready. I'm going to stay right here. Going to help you breathe. That's all. You feel your hands shaking. Travis looked down at his grip on Marcus, and his eyes went fractionally wider. A micro-expression. Fear bleeding through the chemical curtain. That's your body telling you something's wrong, Elena continued. She was in the zone now, the place where time moved differently, where her nervous system had calibrated itself to read the smallest signals in another human being. Your heart's probably 160, 170 beats a minute. Veins are vasoconstrictors, everything tight, everything screaming. That's the PCP. Not you. Not really. I can help you with that. Behind Travis, security was moving, 2 officers, male, built like linebackers, both reaching for restraint kits. Elena gave them the smallest headshake, almost invisible. Not yet. Wrong move in this window, and he'd snap Marcus's neck like a stick. Your name? Elena asked again. Gentle. Like she was talking to someone on a ledge. Travis, the man said. His grip was loosening fractionally. The chemical haze was fighting her words, but something underneath, the human part, the part that wasn't drowning in synthetic neurochemistry, was reaching for her voice like it was a life raft. Travis. Okay. I'm going to count your heartbeats with you, Elena said. Just breathing. For counts in. Hold it. For counts out. You know how to do that. He nodded. Barely. The boy's weight was still in his grip, but the tension had shifted. Fear replacing rage. Fear was negotiable. For minutes. That's how long she kept him tethered to her voice, for minutes of tactical breathing, of redirected attention, of the kind of psychological de-escalation that doesn't appear in any nursing textbook because it comes from somewhere else entirely, from a life lived in rooms where the wrong word means bodies in body bags, from training that teaches you to read a man's intent in the dilation of his pupils, from 6 years of field medicine in an active combat zone where the patient might be the threat. That's when Travis Hollin's body began to betray him. The chemical surge was plateauing. His pupils were still saucers, but the muscle control that rage had given him was dissolving. His breathing became irregular. His grip on Marcus slipped for just a moment, enough time for the boy to twist free with practiced military efficiency. Security moved. They had the restraints on Hollins in less than 10 seconds, professional and practiced, his thrashing no longer coordinated enough to resist the combined mass of trained personnel. But his body was still talking to Elena in the language she understood. The tremor in his limbs. The way his breathing had shifted from rapid to irregular. The pale cast spreading under his dark skin. Cardiac dysrhythmia. The stimulant-induced kind, the lethal kind, the kind that kills men in police custody and fills lawsuits and ruins families. Get him to the ground, Elena said. Her hands were already moving. Flat. Now. Security complied. They lowered Hollins to the hallway tile, and Elena dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers finding his carotid. No pulse. His eyes had rolled back, his mouth slack. The chemical storm had finally overwhelmed his heart's electrical system. Code blue. She didn't wait for anyone to call it. Her hands were already positioned on his sternum, already finding the correct compression site, already settling into the mechanical rhythm of CPR. 100 compressions per minute. The metronome of death fighting. Her hands moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd done this in 100 situations worse than this, intense without electricity, in helicopters at altitude, in vehicles with bullets coming through the windscreen. Get me a monitor, she said. No inflection. Not a request. A command. A code team materialized like they'd been waiting in the walls. An attending physician, a resident, a respiratory therapist with a bag valve mask. Elena didn't pause her compressions. Didn't break rhythm. The tile floor was hard under her knees, but pain was information, and information was irrelevant right now. There was only the compression, the count, the mechanical forcing of blood through a heart that had decided to stop cooperating. 300 compressions, the resident called out, which meant Elena had been pumping his chest for exactly 3 minutes. The monitor showed asystole. Flat line. The worst rhythm, the one that usually meant the patient was dead and she was just keeping his brain warm until they admitted it. Push 1 of epi, Elena said. Already in the line, the attending said. He was young, maybe 35, and his voice had that particular quality of shock that came from watching a floor nurse execute a cardiac protocol with the casual precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Elena's compressions continued. 100 per minute. The count automatic. Her mind already 3 moves ahead, reading the rhythm, reading the patient's response, reading the way his body was telling her that the drug had damaged more than just his heart, his entire sympathetic nervous system was misfiring. Second round of epi, she said. Not asked. And the attending pushed it. Marcus Webb was standing against the wall, his hand pressed to his chest, staring at Elena with an expression she couldn't read. His brother was in the ICU 3 doors down. This man had just tried to kill him. And now this quiet woman was fighting to save him anyway. 8 minutes. That's how long she kept Hollins' heart mechanically viable, her hands moving with the kind of automatic competence that exists in muscle memory alone, exists in a place where training becomes instinct, becomes second nature. Compressions. Medications. Defibrillation attempts. All of it flowing from her hands with the smooth efficiency of someone whose nervous system had been calibrated for this exact scenario by a military medical training pipeline that most nurses never even knew existed. When the ER team took over, Elena sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking, not from exertion, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had nowhere to go now that the crisis had passed. The body's way of metabolizing combat stress. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Dr. Caldwell emerged from his office slowly, his face the color of old paper. Marcus Webb's eyes locked on Elena, and the recognition in his gaze was complete. His hand went to the scar on his neck, the scar from the shrapnel, the scar she'd treated in the field while rounds came in around them. His lips moved. No sound. But Elena knew what he was trying to say. She'd read it in his eyes 20 years ago, had carried it 3 miles through enemy fire, had heard it in the silence that had followed. Thank you. The intruder moved like a predator recognizing prey, 7 feet of muscle and chemical rage, his pupils blown wide enough to swallow light. Travis Hollins had crashed through the pediatric ward security doors at 2:08 p.m., overturning a medication cart with the casual destructive force of a wrecking ball, sending vials of insulin and saline bottles scattering across tile like broken glass. The doors were supposed to be locked. They weren't. Elena heard the impact from the supply room and knew immediately what it meant: chaos. Unpredictability. Blood. Dr. Caldwell was already running the other direction, his Italian leather shoes clicking a rapid retreat down the hallway toward his office. Elena heard the lock engage. Heard him breathing hard on the other side. He'd be calling security now, probably already on the phone, his voice shaking as he described the intruder. But security wouldn't arrive for 4 to 6 minutes. Marcus Webb, the young Marine corporal visiting his little brother in room for 12, was standing directly in the intruder's path. Elena moved. Not toward the exits like protocol demanded. Not toward the panic button. She moved toward Travis Hollins like she was walking into a wind tunnel, her breathing controlled, her voice dropping into the register she hadn't used in 6 years, the command frequency that resonated in the chest, that made men's central nervous systems respond before their conscious minds engaged. Hey! 1 word. Just that. Hollins wheeled toward her, his fists clenched, his chest heaving with the hyperventilation of a PCP high, our blood pressure probably 180/110, heart rate explosive, pupils fixed and dilated, sweat pouring off him like he was melting. She'd seen it in Marja. Different drug, same physiology of rage. Hey, she said again, quieter this time. I need you to look at me. He looked. Your heart's racing right now. Can you feel it? Her voice was calm as a surgeon explaining an incision. That's the drug. Your body's flooding with adrenaline. Your sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive. You're hyperventilating at about 30 breaths a minute. She was walking forward slowly, her hands visible and open, moving like she was diffusing something explosive, because she was. If you keep going, your blood pressure's going to spike past 200. You'll have a stroke. You'll die. Do you understand? Hollins's breathing was a furnace. His eyes were the color of wet concrete, unfocused but tracking her movement with the intensity of a hunting animal. Stay back, he growled, but the growl was already losing conviction. She was speaking his language, not English, but the language of physiology, of the body's logic, of cause and effect. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elena continued, her tone flattening to something almost hypnotic. "I'm a nurse. My job is to keep people alive. Including you. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to sit down on that bench. Right there. You're going to breathe with me. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Do you understand?" Hollins's massive frame seemed to waver. The violence in him was real, imminent, a live wire, but so was the biochemical chaos of the drugs coursing through his system. She was giving him an exit ramp that his biology was already screaming for. The muscles in his shoulders loosened fractionally. "Sit down," Elena said. Not a request. A command. The same tone she'd used when her team was pinned in a compound outside Sanjin Valley, when she'd ordered 3 junior operators to move through a corridor thick with gunfire. "Sit. Now." Hollins Saturday. His breathing was still ragged, still explosive, but he'd lowered himself onto the bench with the mechanical movement of someone following instructions from a source of authority his reptile brain couldn't refuse. Elena positioned herself at a 45-degree angle to him, visible but not threatening, her hands still open. "For counts in," she said. She inhaled slowly, deliberately, making sure he could see the rise and fall of her chest. "Hold it. For counts out." The hallway around them had gone silent. Nurses frozen behind medication carts. An attending physician with his radio half raised to his mouth. Marcus Webb still 10 feet away, his young marine eyes locked on Elena with an expression that looked like recognition. Hollins's breathing began to slow. Not stop, his sympathetic nervous system was still in overdrive, but slower. His pupils were still blown, his skin still slick with sweat, but the violence was receding like a tide. Elena counted silently. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 90 seconds. His heart rate was coming down. His color was changing from the mottled red of hypertension toward something more human. Security arrived at 2:53 p.m., 6 minutes was optimistic, with their hands on their weapons, their voices harsh and authoritative, which was exactly the wrong thing for a drug-intoxicated man whose adrenaline was already in critical territory. Elena held up one hand without breaking eye contact with Hollins. "Stand down," she said, and her voice had the weight of someone used to being obeyed. The security officers actually did, stopping their forward momentum, recognizing in that single command something that transcended their typical protocols. Elena turned back to Hollins. "These are security personnel. They're going to help us get you to the hospital. You understand? You're going to come with them. They're not going to hurt you. But you need to come with them now." Hollins nodded. The fight had drained completely out of him, leaving only the hollow exhaustion of neurochemical collapse. Security approached carefully, respectfully, and had him cuffed and standing before he could mount any resistance. They were lifting him, moving him toward the exit, when Hollins's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went rigid. Then slack. The rhythm that came next wasn't cardiac arrest, it was something worse, a dissolution happening in real time. Hollins's oxygen saturation was dropping like a stone. His lips were turning blue. The drugs had destabilized his cardiac rhythm, and now gravity and chemistry were finishing what adrenaline had started. "His crashing," Elena said, and already she was moving, already her hands were reaching for the crash cart that was somewhere in this hallway, already her muscle memory was taking over, the kind of memory that came from 100 soldiers dying in her arms, from compound fractures and blast wounds and the specific terrible mathematics of keeping someone alive when their body was actively trying to commit suicide. "Lay him down. Flat." Security obeyed. She was already cutting through his shirt with trauma shears, not the standard medical kind, but a set hanging from her pocket with a call sign etched into the handle, and her palms were already positioned on his sternum, already finding the precise anatomical landmark she'd learned 20 years ago and never forgotten. The first compression was brutal. Her hands locked, her arms locked, and she drove her weight through the heel of her palm into his chest like she was trying to restart an engine with pure force. 30 compressions at 120 beats per minute. The ribs were giving under her hands. That was the sound of a successful resuscitation, the wet cracking that meant she was reaching the heart, actually displacing blood from the cardiac chamber with each compression. "Get me a defibrillator," she said. "Pads. Now." Someone was already moving. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, was moving with her, handling the airway, getting an emergency intubation setup ready. "How long?" Elena's voice was clipped, efficient, the voice of someone who'd done this in conditions considerably worse than a hospital hallway. 32 seconds, Chen said, meaning 32 seconds of no perfusion, no blood getting to the brain. Maybe 35. Elena's hands never stopped. Compression, compression, compression. The CPR was a technical requirement, yes, but it was also a conversation with Hollins's body, a conversation conducted entirely in the language of blood pressure and oxygen delivery. She was forcing oxygenated blood through his coronary arteries, keeping his brain alive, buying time for his chemistry to rebalance. His body was a problem to solve, and she'd solved harder problems than this in Helmand Province with nothing but a combat lifesaver pack and the desperate mathematics of triage. "Defibrillator pads ready," someone said. "Let me see the rhythm," Elena said, and for the first time she paused the compressions, not because she was tired but because the medical protocol required it. The screen showed what she'd expected: ventricular fibrillation, the heart's electrical system in complete chaos, like an orchestra where every instrument was playing a different song. "Charging to 200 joules, Chen said. Elena stepped back. "Clear." The word was a command, and the whole hallway obeyed it. Hollins's body convulsed once as the current went through, as his heart's electrical system was hit with enough voltage to rewrite its rhythm. "Still V-fib," Chen said. "Again," Elena said. "Charge to 360. Another shock. Another spasm. Elena was back into compressions immediately after, her hands moving with the practiced rhythm of muscle memory that transcended thought. Compression, compression, compression. Oxygen. Blood. Perfusion. The heart was a pump, and she was the external pump now, buying time until the defibrillator could restore electrical order to the chaos of his dying heart. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The hallway had gone into another dimension. There was nothing in the world but Hollins's body and Elena's hands and the steady repetition of physics and medicine. She could hear her own breathing, controlled and even, could feel the warmth of blood beginning to transfer through the friction of compressions. Could feel the moment when the heart, hit with the right combination of electricity and mechanical support, remembered how to beat on its own. "We have a rhythm," Chen said, and the word seemed to come from very far away. "Normal sinus. Blood pressure 84/52 and climbing. We have pulses." Elena stepped back. Her hands were shaking now, not with fear but with the metabolic debt of hard physical labor, of muscles that had burned through reserves. She flexed her fingers. They were warm. Sticky. She'd given Hollins his life back, had pushed him back from the edge with nothing but her hands and her knowledge and the terrifying muscle memory that no amount of civilian living could erase. "Get him to trauma," she said, and her voice was completely steady. "Portable monitor, 2 large bores, draw labs, whole blood standing by. Move." They moved. The stretcher was there in seconds, and Hollins, still unconscious, still fighting his way back from neurochemical collapse, was being wheeled toward the elevator and the trauma bays below. Elena watched him go, then looked down at her hands. Blood was drying on her palms. Under her fingernails. On the sleeves of her scrubs. The tarnished military challenge coin in her pocket, the one she'd gripped in countless supply closets, felt suddenly very heavy. She was walking toward the scrub sink when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew who it was. She could hear the particular rhythm of Dr. Caldwell's approach, the hurried walk of a man emerging from hiding, the confident gait of someone who'd already started rewriting the story in his head. The sink was cool under her hands as she turned on the water. The blood swirled in the basin, mixing with soap, turning pink, then clear. She didn't look in the mirror, but she could see his reflection behind her, could see the calculation happening in his eyes. "You violated every evacuation protocol we have," Dr. Caldwell said. His voice was measured now, careful, the tone of a man beginning to play a game he'd already won in his mind. "You endangered patients by engaging instead of clearing the floor." Elena dried her hands methodically. "Soap. Paper towel." She turned to face him, and in that turn was the absolute composure of someone who'd stared into the eyes of men with rifles and had not blinked. The patient was already endangered. "I stabilized the situation." Caldwell's smile was cold, and it carried within it the confidence of a man who believed power flowed from titles and board connections instead of from competence and the willingness to break yourself to keep others alive. "You've just ended your career," he said quietly, and walked back toward his office, already reaching for his phone. The phone call lasted 47 seconds. Dr. Caldwell sat at his mahogany desk in the chief's office, the receiver pressed against his ear like a man conducting a symphony he'd already memorized, speaking names that had opened doors for him for 15 years. 3 board members. The investigator he'd worked with on the pediatric negligence case in Nashville. A narrative already written before Elena had even finished her shift, protocol violation, patient endangerment, insubordination masked as heroics. His voice carried the certainty of a man who believed power was transferable, that favors were currency you could spend indefinitely. The woman operating outside chain of command. She engaged an active threat instead of evacuating. That's documentation. That's grounds. The silence on the other end stretched just long enough for him to feel the first needle of doubt. "Then, send us the complaint. We'll review it." He hung up and allowed himself a smile, the kind a predator wears when it senses the prey is already bleeding. The formal complaint was filed at 6:43 p.m. Single-spaced, carefully worded, Elena Martinez had endangered pediatric patients by engaging a violent intruder instead of following established evacuation protocols. She had acted without authorization. She had taken command of a medical situation despite lacking the clinical authority to do so. The investigator, a man named Pierce with 3 prior partnerships with Caldwell, flagged the file as urgent. Expedited review. 48 hours. Elena didn't know any of this yet. She was in the hospital laundry room on the 3rd floor, alone beneath fluorescent lights that hummed like insects trapped in amber. Her scrubs lay folded on the steel table in front of her, the stack perfectly aligned, each sleeve creased with parade ground precision. 1 fold. 2 folds. 3. The fabric blurred in her vision, not because she couldn't see clearly, but because something inside her had learned long ago that tears were a luxury soldiers didn't get to afford. The challenge coin was in her pocket. She could feel its weight, the dent where a bullet had stopped it in Marja, the raised insignia that read Task Force 121. She gripped it and felt nothing. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, the terrible, controlled shaking of someone who knows exactly what she's capable of doing and chooses not to do it anyway. Her hands remained steady as she folded. Steady as they'd been in the war. Steady as they'd been holding a dying child while the world tried to kill them both. The board's expedited review took exactly 17 hours. By 8:15 a.m. the following morning, she received the letter. Not a call. Not a meeting. A letter delivered by the hospital's HR director, a woman named Patricia who wouldn't meet her eyes. The words were clinical, surgical in their precision, effective immediately. Your employment with St. Michael's Hospital is terminated for violation of established safety protocols and conduct unbecoming of hospital standards. Severance package. References available upon request. Thank you for your service. That word. Service. As if 6 years of showing up for children at their worst moments, holding parents' hands while the machines beat their terrible songs, had meant nothing. As if the job that had saved her life by giving her a reason to be alive was something to be disposed of in 2 paragraphs and a hospital letterhead. Elena carried her belongings to her car in a cardboard box that had once held surgical supplies. The parking lot was beginning to fill with people, press vans pulling in with their satellite dishes ready, and she realized, with the clarity of someone who'd read Hostile Intent her entire adult life, that Dr. Caldwell had scheduled a press conference. Maintaining safety protocols in pediatric environments. The headline was probably already written. She was loading the box into her trunk when Mateo burst from the hospital entrance, running across the parking lot with the speed of a 17-year-old who'd just discovered something that changed everything. His breathing came hard, his face flushed, and he was carrying the shadow box, the one she'd hidden in the attic 6 years ago, the one she'd never intended anyone to see. It was made from black walnut, lined with velvet, and inside it lay everything she'd spent 2 decades trying to bury. "Mom, they need to see these." His voice carried across the parking lot like a bell rung in a cathedral, loud enough that the crowd gathering near the hospital entrance turned. All of them. The reporters with their cameras. The board members in their pressed suits. Dr. Caldwell, standing at the microphone with his prepared statement about protocol and standards and the importance of hierarchy in crisis management. The shadow box opened. Inside lay medals hanging from ribbons, not the generic ones they handed out for showing up. Bronze Star. Silver Star. And 2 purple hearts lying beside them like old friends who'd shared foxholes and worse. Beside them, laminated orders and a Master Chief Petty Officer insignia with the anchor and trident that meant something only to people who understood what it cost to earn it. Marcus Webb stepped forward first, still in his marine dress uniform from the emergency ward, his voice cracking the way voices do when they've just recognized a ghost. "That's Shadow 6. The camera swiveled. "That's who she was. That's who she is." A woman he'd last seen as a dying 7-year-old child, carried through fire, now stood in her civilian clothes, being recognized by the one person who'd been there when the worst happened. The hospital's head of security, a retired Marine named Holloway who'd pulled entrance duty for the morning, straightened to attention so sharp you could hear it snap. His eyes were suddenly wet. Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, United States Special Forces. His voice didn't break, but it came close. Decorated operator. 3 Navy Crosses. Wounded twice in theater. Current status, officially erased from military records per Classified Operation Termination Protocol Marja 2004 onward. Then the crowd parted and a 2-star general stepped through, Admiral Grant, her former commanding officer, someone Elena hadn't seen in 6 years, someone she'd assumed had forgotten she existed. The general took the shadow box from Mateo's hands and began to read, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made the parking lot go quiet. Bronze Star for Valor Under Fire, Helmand Province, 2006. Silver Star for Leadership Under Extreme Duress, Sanjin Valley, 2008. 2 Purple Hearts. And 3 Navy Crosses, the highest combat decoration this nation can award to enlisted personnel. Each sentence landed like ordnance. Like the kind of bomb that doesn't destroy buildings but rebuilds the landscape of how people see you forever. Marcus Webb's voice came next, steady now, the voice of a military man telling the truth in front of cameras. "I was 12 years old in Marja when my village was attacked. Helicopter fire. People everywhere dying. This woman, Master Chief Martinez, she picked me up. I was bleeding. I was dying. And she carried me 3 miles through active combat fire. Her unit took 60% casualties getting me out." He paused, and his eyes found Elena's across the parking lot. She had a challenge coin. I remember it. The bullet hit it instead of her heart. That coin kept her alive so she could keep me alive. The silence lasted exactly 10 seconds. Long enough for the truth to settle. Long enough for every reporter to understand they were standing in the presence of something larger than a hospital employment dispute. Admiral Grant turned toward Dr. Caldwell, and her face had transformed into something that made even the board members step back a quarter step. When she spoke, her voice could have melted steel. "Doctor, you terminated a decorated Master Chief Petty Officer, a woman who spent 2 decades in classified operations protecting American interests, who was wounded twice serving her country, for protecting children in your hospital. For doing the exact thing she's dedicated her life to. That's not protocol violation. That's not insubordination. That's betrayal of someone who bled for this country. The news cameras were rolling. The satellite vans had their feeds live. What happened next wasn't just a vindication, it was a demolition of everything Caldwell had spent 15 years constructing. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, and he reached for the language of administration and liability and policy. She violated established prota, but Admiral Grant cut him off with a single raised hand, the gesture older than nations. She saved a man's life with emergency thoracotomy while you hid in your office. I've seen the security footage. I've read the procedure notes. A patient was in cardiac arrest. She restored function. That's not protocol violation. That's medicine. The general's eyes moved across the crowd. That's heroism. One of the board members, a man in a suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly mortgage, stepped forward with his face already shifting into damage control mode. But it was too late. The optics had crystallized. A woman who'd served with distinction was being terminated by a man who'd hidden. Marcus Webb spoke again, his Marine uniform like a banner. Chief Martinez saved my life when I was a child. Yesterday, she saved the life of the man who attacked us. What did you do, Dr. Caldwell? When that person was in the ward, when patients were in danger, what did you do? The crowd had gone absolutely still. Parents who'd been in the pediatric ward during the incident started speaking up, their voices stacking like evidence. She was the only one who helped. She saved my son. The doctor ran away. Caldwell's carefully constructed authority collapsed in real time, the way structures fail when the foundation was never as solid as everyone believed. His board members started moving backward, physically creating distance, unwilling to be caught in the disaster's gravity. His networking advantage, the collection of favors he'd spent 15 years accumulating, had evaporated in the presence of truth and cameras and a 2-star general who'd flown in from Atlanta because she still believed in people who kept their oath. The hospital administrator, pale as surgical gauze, stepped to the microphone with Admiral Grant standing beside him. When he spoke, his words had the quality of a door closing forever. Dr. Caldwell's termination is effective immediately. His credentials are under review. Security will assist him from the premises. Guards, the same kind, competent people Elena had trained alongside, moved toward Caldwell with the kind of gentle firmness that left no room for negotiation. He tried to speak about legal action, about proper procedures, about his credentials and his network and his Yale ring catching the light one last time as he was led across the parking lot to his car. The cameras followed him. The narrative had already rewritten itself. The administrator turned then, and he held out Elena's badge, the one they'd taken from her that morning. His hands were shaking slightly, and his voice carried the weight of institutional shame. Master Chief Martinez, we were wrong. We would like you to return to St. Michael's, not as a nurse, but as our pediatric emergency response coordinator. A position created specifically for you, with authority to override attending physicians in crisis situations, with the kind of autonomy your skill deserves. Elena looked at the badge. She looked at Mateo holding her shadow box, his eyes bright with something between pride and vindication. She looked at Marcus Webb standing at attention, his uniform like a testament to something neither of them had been able to explain until this moment. She looked at Admiral Grant, whose nod carried permission and recognition. She took the badge. 6 months later, Elena heard through the hospital grapevine that Caldwell was teaching CPR certification courses at a community college in the northern suburbs, the kind of work that paid $15 an hour and came with no titles, no network, no authority. His board connections had dried up. The viral video of his public firing had followed him everywhere. He was teaching people how to save lives for minimum wage, which Elena recognized as a kind of poetry, the universe's way of reminding him what the job actually meant. But that was 6 months away. In this moment, Elena stood in the parking lot in her civilian clothes, holding her badge, and for the first time since she'd chosen to disappear into civilian life, she felt like she could actually breathe. Mateo stood beside her with the shadow box. Marcus Webb held his salute. The three of them were framed against the hospital entrance where Elena had always belonged, where she would go back and do the work she'd been trained to do her whole life, not in secret anymore, but in the light. The challenge coin still sat in her pocket. But now it sat alongside her official credentials, beside her newly reissued ID, next to the things that said out loud what she'd always known: she was a Master Chief Petty Officer. She was a decorated warrior. She was a nurse. Those things were not separate. They were the same thing. If you've ever been invisible, ever been underestimated, ever been told you didn't matter by someone who didn't know the first thing about you, subscribe to this channel. Because we tell the stories of the quiet ones, the people who hold everything together while the world tries to take them apart. Like and comment with your story. She's still out there, you know. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together.